3 weeks before my younger sister's wedding, my parents finally called me after almost 4 years of silence. For one impossible second, I thought they wanted to rebuild our family. Instead, my mother calmly read 5 conditions I had to accept before I would be allowed to attend the wedding. I wasn't allowed to speak during the reception. I couldn't tell anyone why I had left home. I had to apologize for things I never did. And the 5th condition changed everything. I quietly declined the invitation, then mailed one final gift that nobody at that wedding ever forgot. My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 31 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon, where I own a small interior design studio that keeps me busy enough to appreciate the quiet life I've built. Most mornings begin with coffee on my apartment balcony, emails from clients, and the comforting realization that nobody is waiting to criticize every decision I make. It took me years to believe peace could feel normal. 4 years ago, I walked away from my family with 2 suitcases, a used sedan, and no plan beyond never letting them decide my worth again. People often assume someone leaves their parents because of one explosive argument. My story wasn't like that. It happened through thousands of small moments that slowly convinced me I would never matter as much as my younger sister, Emily. Emily wasn't a bad person. She was simply born into the role our parents had already written for her. She was the daughter they proudly introduced to neighbors, celebrated at every holiday, and praised for accomplishments both big and small. I became the comparison. If Emily earned an A, I should have earned an A+. If she forgot something, she was overwhelmed. If I made the same mistake, I was irresponsible. Eventually, I stopped trying to compete for love that always came with conditions. The day I finally left was during my aunt's retirement party. In front of dozens of relatives, my father joked that I had always been the family's biggest disappointment because I cared more about my career than about real family values. Everyone laughed politely except me. My mother smiled, raised her glass, and said, "At least Emily understands loyalty." Something inside me became strangely calm. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I drove home, packed my belongings, left my house key on the kitchen counter, and never moved back. During the 4 years that followed, not one birthday card arrived. Not one holiday invitation. Not one sincere apology. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years.
Mom.
I stared at the screen until it almost stopped ringing before finally answering.
She didn't ask how I was.
She didn't say she missed me. Instead, in the same calm voice she used to read grocery lists, she said, "If you want to attend your sister's wedding, there are 5 conditions." For a few seconds, I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. I stood in my kitchen with my phone pressed against my ear while she spoke in the same calm, matter-of-fact voice she had always used whenever she believed she was being perfectly reasonable. "Your sister wants everyone together on her wedding day," she said. "But after everything that's happened, we need a few ground rules." Ground rules. As though I were the one who had spent years tearing the family apart. I didn't interrupt. I simply listened. "The first condition," she began, "is that you'll come alone. No husband, no boyfriend, no friends. This is a family event." That wasn't difficult. I wasn't married, and I had no intention of bringing anyone into that environment anyway. "The second condition," she continued, "is that you'll sit at the back of the ceremony. We don't want unnecessary questions from guests who don't know the situation." In other words, they wanted me hidden. I stayed silent. "The third condition is that you'll apologize to your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles, and anyone else you may have hurt by leaving without explaining yourself." I almost laughed. I had spent 4 years wondering whether anyone had ever asked why I left. Apparently, they had already decided I was the problem. Before I could respond, she moved on. "The fourth condition is simple. If anyone asks why you disappeared, you'll tell them you needed space and that our family has always loved you." Those words settled over me like ice. Our family has always loved you. The sentence felt almost unreal. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I had spent too many nights wishing it had been true. Then came the final condition. Her voice became softer, almost pleasant. "Your grandmother left you that lakeside property years ago. Emily and her fiancé want to build their first home there.
She paused.
We think it would be a beautiful wedding gift if you signed it over before the ceremony. Everything suddenly made sense. The phone call, the invitation, the conditions. None of it was about healing. None of it was about family. They hadn't called because they missed me. They had called because they wanted the last thing my grandmother had ever given me. I took a slow breath before answering. I'm not coming. There was complete silence. Then my mother gave a short, disappointed laugh. You'll regret that, Olivia. Quietly, I replied. No, I already know what regret feels like. That's exactly why I won't. After I ended the call, I sat at my kitchen table without moving. The apartment was completely quiet except for the steady ticking of the clock above the stove. I kept thinking about my grandmother. Out of everyone in my family, she had been the only person who saw me for who I really was. She never compared Emily and me. She never asked why I wasn't more obedient or more agreeable. Whenever I visited her little lakeside cottage, she'd hand me a mug of hot chocolate, sit beside me on the porch, and say, "You don't have to earn love, sweetheart. The right people give it freely." At the time, I thought every grandmother talked like that. Years later, I realized she was trying to protect me from something she knew she couldn't stop. A few months before she passed away, she asked me to visit her alone. She handed me a small envelope containing the deed to a modest piece of lakeside property next to her cottage. "It isn't worth millions," she said with a smile, "but it's yours." I remember trying to refuse. She gently closed my hand around the envelope. "Promise me one thing." I nodded. "No matter what happens after I'm gone, never let anyone convince you that keeping your peace is selfish." Those words stayed with me long after her funeral. Not because of the land, because they were the first permission anyone had ever given me to choose myself. My parents had tried more than once to convince me to sign the property over to Emily. Sometimes they called it fairness. Sometimes they called it family responsibility. Once they even suggested Grandma hadn't understood what she was doing. Every conversation ended the same way. I politely said no. This time was different. Within an hour of hanging up, my phone exploded with messages. My aunt wrote, "It's just a piece of land." A cousin texted, "Don't ruin your sister's wedding over pride." Another relative added, "Family should always come first." Not one person asked why my attendance came with conditions. Not one person questioned why giving away my inheritance had suddenly become the price of belonging. I looked at the stack of messages, then quietly turned my phone face down. They were right about one thing. It wasn't just land. It was the last gift my grandmother had ever chosen specifically for me. And unlike everything else my parents had tried to take, this was one thing I would never surrender. Instead, another idea slowly began to form. If I wasn't attending the wedding, I would still send a gift.
Just not the one they expected.
The morning after the phone calls finally stopped, I drove to a small stationery shop a few blocks from my office. For almost an hour, I wandered through the aisles without buying anything. I wasn't looking for expensive wrapping paper or an elegant ribbon. I was trying to decide what kind of ending I wanted the story to have. Anger would have been easy. Silence would have been easier. But neither one felt right. When I got home, I opened the cedar chest that had followed me through every move since I left Illinois. Inside were pieces of a life I rarely looked at anymore. Old photographs, birthday cards, school drawings, letters. Carefully folded between two photo albums was my grandmother's handwriting. I smiled before I even unfolded the first page. She wrote exactly the way she spoke, warmly, honestly, without pretending difficult things didn't exist. I spent the afternoon reading every letter she had ever mailed me.
Some were funny.
Some were full of gardening advice. Some simply reminded me to believe in myself when nobody else seemed to. By evening, I knew exactly what I wanted to send. I found my favorite photograph of Grandma sitting on the porch between Emily and me when we were little girls. Emily couldn't have been more than 6. I was 10. We were laughing so hard neither of us was looking at the camera. Before our parents taught us to compete, we had actually loved being sisters. I placed the framed photograph inside a sturdy gift box. Next came copies of several letters Grandma had written over the years. Letters about kindness, honesty, forgiveness, and choosing love over pride. Then I wrote one final letter of my own. Not to my parents. To Emily. I told her I didn't blame her for the childhood we had grown up in. Children believe the stories they're given.
So had she.
I wrote that I genuinely hoped her marriage would be filled with the kind of respect and patience our family had never learned to give each other. I told her she deserved happiness. But I also told her something I had spent years learning myself. Love should never require silence. Family should never demand that someone surrender their dignity just to be included. And no wedding gift was worth giving away the last promise our grandmother had entrusted to me. At the very end, I wrote one simple sentence. If you ever want to know the whole truth, my door will always be open. I sealed the envelope, closed the box, and tied it with a plain white ribbon. No dramatic note. No accusation. No attempt to embarrass anyone. Just the truth. 2 days before the wedding, I mailed the package by overnight delivery. When I walked out of the post office, I felt strangely lighter. For the first time since my mother's phone call, I wasn't carrying anger anymore. I was carrying certainty. The next afternoon, while I was finishing a client presentation, my phone began vibrating across my desk. Unknown number. It stopped, then rang again, and again. By the 5th call, I knew someone at the wedding had opened my gift. I ignored the first 5 calls, then the 6th. By the 7th, curiosity finally won. I answered without saying anything. For a moment, all I heard was noise, voices talking over one another, music playing somewhere in the background, and what sounded like dishes clinking. Then my cousin Rachel spoke. Olivia? I recognized her voice immediately. Yes. You should know what happened. My stomach tightened. What happened? She let out a slow breath. Emily opened your gift while everyone was getting ready. I leaned back in my chair and waited. Rachel continued. At first, she smiled when she saw the picture of the 3 of you with Grandma. Then she started reading the letters. There was a long pause. When she got to your letter, she just stopped. I didn't interrupt. She sat there crying for almost 20 minutes. I closed my eyes. Not because I felt victorious. Because I had imagined that moment so many different ways, and none of them involved my sister crying alone before her wedding. Rachel's voice grew quieter. She kept asking Mom when Grandma wrote those letters. And no one answered. Another silence settled between us. Finally, Rachel said, Emily asked if what you wrote was true. My heart pounded. Did they tell her? They tried not to. According to Rachel, my mother insisted I was exaggerating. My father claimed I had always been dramatic. But then Emily picked up Grandma's letters again. Every page carried the same gentle message. Be kind. Tell the truth. Never confuse control with love. The words didn't sound like accusations. They sounded like wisdom, and that made them impossible to dismiss. Rachel told me Emily looked around the room and quietly asked one question. If Olivia lied about everything, why do Grandma's letters say the same things? No one had an answer. The room stayed completely silent. A few minutes later, Emily stood up. She handed my mother the property documents they had prepared for me to sign. I don't want them. My mother stared at her. Emily shook her head. I'm not starting my marriage by taking something Grandma wanted Olivia to keep. Rachel said. My father's face turned bright red. My mother began crying. Neither reaction changed Emily's mind. During the reception, after thanking everyone for coming, my sister added something no one expected.
She thanked me.
She said although I couldn't be there, the most meaningful gift she received wasn't something expensive. It was the chance to understand her own family more honestly. Guests looked from one table to another, confused. Some relatives lowered their eyes. Others glanced toward my parents, who suddenly seemed very interested in their untouched dinner plates. That evening, just after sunset, my phone buzzed one more time. This time, the message wasn't from an unknown number. It was from Emily. I think we've both been living inside different versions of the same childhood. If you're willing, I'd like to hear yours. Emily called the next evening. I stared at her name on my screen for almost a minute before answering. Neither of us spoke right away. After years of silence, neither of us knew where to begin. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry." 2 simple words. Not rehearsed, not forced, just honest. I should have asked questions years ago. I leaned back on my sofa and looked out the window. "You were a kid, Emily. I wasn't by the time you left." Her voice cracked. I just believed everything they told me. She admitted our parents had always explained my absence the same way. They said I had become selfish, that I cared more about money than family, that I had abandoned everyone who loved me. She paused before quietly adding, "I never imagined they were leaving out almost the entire story." For the next hour, we talked about memories that had never made sense before. The retirement party, Grandma quietly slipping me books and art supplies every birthday, the constant comparisons, the silence after I moved away. Piece by piece, the missing parts began fitting together. Neither of us tried to rewrite the past. There was too much pain for that. Instead, we talked about the future. Emily told me she had already informed Mom and Dad that she would never ask for the lakeside property again. She also told them something else. If having Olivia in this family requires conditions, then maybe the conditions are the real problem. They didn't take it well. According to Emily, our parents insisted I had turned her against them. For the first time in her life, she calmly disagreed. "No," she told them. "You did that yourselves." When she repeated those words to me, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not victory, relief. We ended the call with no dramatic promises. No instant healing. Just one small agreement. We wouldn't let our parents decide what being sisters meant anymore. It wasn't the ending either of us had imagined as children, but it was an honest beginning. And after everything we'd lived through, honesty felt like the strongest foundation we could possibly build. 6 months after the wedding, Emily invited me to spend a weekend at the little lakeside property Grandma had left me. The place hadn't changed very much. The porch still creaked beneath our footsteps. The old willow tree still leaned toward the water. For the first time in years, being there didn't remind me of everything I had lost. It reminded me of what I had managed to keep. Emily arrived carrying a small flowering dogwood tree in the back of her car. "I thought Grandma would have liked this," she said. Together, we planted it near the edge of the lake where she used to drink her morning coffee. Neither of us talked much while we worked. We didn't need to. Some moments become meaningful simply because they are peaceful. Before leaving, Emily hugged me and smiled. "I'm glad you didn't give them the land." I smiled back. "I'm glad you didn't ask me to." As I watched her drive away, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. My parents believed love could be controlled through guilt, conditions, and obedience. Grandma believed love should leave people feeling safe. Only one of those lessons deserved to survive. My parents had demanded 5 conditions before I could attend a wedding. I declined every one of them. Instead, I mailed the only gift that truly mattered. Not money, not property, the truth. They kept the empty chair they had prepared for me. I kept my self-respect. And looking back now, I know without a single doubt, that was the happiest ending I could have chosen.